Good afternoon, friends. Thank you so much for inviting me to address your meeting today, not just in Banbury and Evesham at the Adderbury Meeting House symbolically, because we can't be there in person, but across the world with whoever might have joined us from wherever today. So welcome all of you. Can I just remind folks who, like myself, as you may discover, come question and answer time, are very hard of hearing. And in fact, I have a special Bluetooth transmitter feeding into my hearing aids. If you are in that situation, if you click on CC of your screen, you have the option to turn on subtitles. Or if they're already on and you don't need them, you can turn them off. I'm going to start by reading you something very weird. And it's from this book, A Celtic Miscellany, by Professor Jackson, who was for many years the professor of Celtic studies at Edinburgh University. And it's a 16th century Irish text in translation called The Best and the Worst Nail in Noah's Ark. So we're talking about rising seas. We're talking about significant areas of the world down by coast becoming inundated. According to the most reputable scientific sources, the likely rise in sea level during the course of this century will be between about 1/2 and 2/3 of a meter. The way things are going, it may be more like 1 meter, and the highest level of the sensible sort of estimates put it up in the areas of 2 meters or thereabouts, which is very significant. So the metaphor, as I would see it as being, of Noah's Ark is pertinent to us in these times. And listen to this story, because it involves a shipwright who is jealous, who is envious. And the story is that the shipwright who made the ark left an empty place for nail in it, because he was sure that he himself would not be taken in. In other words, he was hoping he would sink the ark once it got going by causing it to leak. When Noah went into the ark with his children, as the angel had told him, Noah shut the windows of the ark and raised his hand to bless it. Now the devil, and what would we do without the devil? I believe some of the early Quakers call the devil the great reasoner. What would we do without the devil to bring these stories into life? Now the devil had come into the ark along with him as he went into it. And when Noah blessed the ark, the devil found no other way but the empty hole which the shipwright had left unclosed. And he went in the form of a snake. And because of the tightness of the hole, he could not go out nor come back. In other words, he got stuck. And he was like this until the flood ebbed. And that is the best and the worst nail that was in the ark. An absolute bampot of a story, and yet a spiritual teaching story, and one that I'm using today. I think I used it also when I spoke to the circle of riders in the storm. I'm using it today to suggest climate change. Oh, sorry, my internet went my internet will go unstable from time to time. It's Sunday afternoon here, so all the teenagers are downloading movies and folk watching sport and so on. When I see my internet goes unstable, I'll just stop speaking for a moment. On the one hand, climate change is the worst thing overall that is happening to the world just now. If you like, metaphorically speaking, it's the devil coming into the world. But I want to put it to you that as people of faith, whether you are here today as a Quaker, as a friend with a capital F, or otherwise, as people of faith, we must not let a good crisis go to waste. Never let a good crisis go to waste. As people of faith, it is incumbent upon us to bring a deeper perspective to bear on what is happening in the world at this time of our human evolution, at this time of the evolution of conscious life on Earth itself, and to ask ourselves, what do these signs of our times reveal to us? What do they tell us about ourselves? And do we have anything as a religious society of friends, as a society concerned with the spiritual life? Do we have anything distinctive to bring? Because if we do not, friends, you might as well switch off your screens just now, because your time would be better spent watching something that Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace or the WWF or any number of the more secular organizations concerned about climate change might be offering. My interest here today is, what do we have to offer as people of faith, and of people of a particular kind of faith that is mystical in its bearing and is moved by the Spirit. Where do I have that? Do I have it handy here just now? No, I think I've mislaid it. I'm looking for that beautiful book of Quaker mysticism called Truth of the Heart. And I think I might have left it on the stair intending to bring it up, but a book of George Fox's sayings. Many of you will know of it. Many of you will know of it. We are talking about a truth of the heart. And the interesting thing is that in the New Testament, when the word truth is used, the Greek that is being translated is the word aletheia, A-L-E-T-H-I-A, a feminine noun. And aletheia also means reality, reality revealed. The truth shall set you free, reality will set you free. And it is exactly the same in Sanskrit with the word satya, S-A-T-Y-A, which means both truth and reality. And therefore, when Mahatma Gandhi spoke of satyagraha, truth force, he meant the truth to reality that will set us free. And he said the alternative to truth is to be out of alignment with reality. And this is where it is so important in understanding climate change and responding to it, that we constantly seek to discern as best we can the truth around the matter. Now, I'm going to speak to you in three sections just now. We're talking about how we ride the storm that is coming upon us. And in the first part, I want to ask a little bit about what is the storm. I am not going to give you a recap of climate change. I'm assuming that most of you here will already have familiarized yourselves with the basics of climate change, because I want to focus on the more important aspect of what we can bring to it as friends. I'm then going to speak a little about how we understand how to look at climate change, because that is so important in a time of so-called post-truth, in a time when there are so many conspiracy theories from all different angles around, and conspiracy theory thinking also affects multiple facets of the climate change debate. And finally, most importantly, I want to look at how we respond to climate change. In terms of what is happening with climate change, let me try and share screen here. And I'm just going to take you through a few slides that I've got here. That's Riders in the Storm. You might be slightly confused. We've just reprinted it, same book, but with a different cover, hence right being the new one. And I just want to take you here to where my wife is French, Verena is French. People are in the south of France. That's the Pic Saint-Loup. Any of you who are fond of wine will know of that domain, appellation, whichever it is. The mountain of the Saint of the Wolf, Pic Saint-Loup. Whenever I go back there, folks, I have to confess, you know, I let a huge I just can't contain myself. You know, I get so excited at the thought of a mountain that looks like a wolf from certain angles howling, and there it is. But look at it all around blackened, because what was happening, this was 2014, I think it was, is Verena's parents' place. And as we approached, you could smell burning in the air. And as we got closer, we saw the pompiers, the firefighters, drying out their hoses. And we started to see that miles and miles and miles of the terrain had been burnt. And when we got back to Verena's parents' house, we saw how close the fire had come. And her parents said that they had been phoned by the emergency services in the night and said, get out, you've only got time to pack one bag. And what was so hard was to choose what to put in that one bag, essential documents, etc., as they evacuated. You can see the fire came very close to their place. That's taken from their house. That's the neighbor's house there. And some of the houses in the neighborhood did not survive. Some of the houses were burnt to the ground. So, you know, what was going on here? What was going on here was typical of what climate change is doing in many parts of the world. The weather patterns have been changing. When you add weather upon weather, not just one year, but year after year, that adds up to climate. Climate is a long-term view, weather is a short-term view. That's been changing, and as predicted by climate science, the place is getting drier for longer, and that makes it more likely to have forest fires like this. But the interesting dynamic is that this fire was not entirely down to climatological factors, because what actually happened was that it was extremely dry. They had the fire watchers out watching so they could call in the planes and scoop up seawater and drop it on the area if a fire breaks out. And fire broke out here simultaneously in 3 places. And it was a disenchanted youth on a motorbike with a can of petrol who had gone around setting it going. Now, some people will use something like that to say, oh, well, you know, it's not due to climate change, it's due to, it's due to the disenchanted youth or whoever the pyromaniacs might be. I would put it to you that what we need to understand is that these things are interconnected. It's not just one or the other thing in a fire like this. It is both of them. And the same kind of factors that lead our youth to be disconnected, to be disengaged from society, are the same kind of factors that drive the consumerism, which is a major aspect of climate change. So I'm edging on here to how we get satisfaction in our edging on to what drives humorism. Now, I could talk about other things. I'm not going to just now, because as I say, this is not a talk about the science per se. I want to focus on other things. Although in Riders of the Storm, the first 4 chapters of this are solidly about the science, and Professor Michael Mann in this latest edition describes this as a climate primer for our time. Catherine Hayhoe, the chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy in America, describes it as being a primer for COP26, the climate change conference of the United Nations that is coming here to Glasgow in November. And if I can risk taking my camera off, because I am speaking to you from Govan in Glasgow just now, which is the very parish in which COP26 will take place. So, you know, there's our garden, there's an industrial factory that you see there, a Victorian school behind, and about a mile over that way is where COP26 is coming to. So this is right in the epicenter here. Am I still on camera? There we go. This is right in the epicenter of where it's going to be happening here. And obviously it's a big thing for Glasgow Quaker Meeting, which is looking at ways in which you can most wisely use the space of the Quaker Meeting in order to support the activities going on. Now, I want to move on now to how we understand climate science, because as you may have figured out, it's very difficult to pin down exactly what is or is not happening. If you read certain newspapers, it may tell you that climate change is not happening, that it's all a hoax by greedy scientists who want to get grants. Or they may now say, because it is becoming impossible to hold that line any longer, evidence. They may well say, okay, well, it's happening, but it's too expensive for us to do anything about it. The idea that we have to cut our carbon dioxide emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 to accord with the Paris Agreement, the international agreement on cutting emissions, and bring it down to net zero emissions by 2050, that is something we can't afford. Yes, you know, 30 miles from here, we can afford to have 4 Trident nuclear submarines patrolling the Earth and all the rest of it. Yes, we can afford the fancy cars and big houses that require lots of heating and all these things, but we cannot afford to take the steps that climate change would require, or so certain aspects of the press would have us believe. That is the climate change denial side of things. Let me read you, ooh, nearly knocked my cup of tea over. Let me read you the kind of things that climate change deniers say, because there's been a lot of studies done of the psychology of climate change. That's a good book. They're edited by Paul Hoggart on the what's it called? Climate Psychology on Indifference to Disorder. You know, what is the roots of that indifference? Where was the other one I've got there? There's never mind. You know, a number of studies done into why it is that people deny or play down that climate change is happening. This is the kind of thing people say. I don't like negativity. I don't like people moaning and groaning. I haven't got much patience. Actually, I don't like doom and gloom predictions, although I may think, there is probably some truth in what they're saying. We fly too much. That is, I don't know what it is that is being spoiled. Having the money to do it and doing it. Having the money to do it and doing it, you know, our problem affluenza, that some people in the world are too affluent, whereas others have got nothing. And so this ties in with the whole issue around world poverty. I don't feel guilty, no. I don't feel guilty. I mean, I put up a kind of, I put up a wall. And don't we all? You know, if I'm honest, that speaks a little bit for me too. I don't know about you. So that's a climate change denial side of things. And that is typically driven by right-wing lobby groups funded by very wealthy people. I discuss all of that kind of thing in the book there. But another aspect of this, which is less obvious, is climate change alarmism. Now, climate change alarmism are people like Professor Guy McPherson, a retired ecologist in America, who predicts that by the year 2026, human beings will be extinct because of climate change. He's not the only one. Roger predicts that 6 to 7 billion people will die this century. And there are other prominent figures who make similar types of prediction to help drive concern, to help activate people. Now, remember what I said at the beginning about aletheia or satya, the words for truth: satya, satyagraha, Gandhi's truth force, reality force, or equally God or soul force. The question that I pose in this book is what happens if we get out of alignment with truth? What does it do to our perspective on reality? And my friend, by at least by correspondence, Michael Mann, Michael, in his recent book, The New Climate Wars, actually expresses considerable concern about alarmism from us activists. He says, as activists, we must be very careful within the science. Otherwise, if we call wolf, if we shout an alarmist message that goes beyond what the accepted science of climate change is saying, then two things happen. One is we discredit the science if and when our predictions don't come true. So Guy McPherson is going to have a lot of followers kind of wondering what's happened if there are still human beings on Earth come 2026. But the other thing that is even more insidious that he majors on is that if we take the line that there's nothing we can really do about it, then we don't do anything about it. Coming about between climate change denialism and climate change alarmism, because both can lead to forms of checking out from engagement with reality. So that is how we understand it. And so that will leave us, or may leave you, with the question, how do we know what's going on with climate change? You know, I read this in the Independent, I read that in the Daily Mail, I hear such and such in the BBC and something else on ITV or whatever it is. Most of us here are probably not climate scientists, so how do we find out what's going on? And that is where my angle in my books on climate change, and especially in this latest one where I've really focused on it, my angle is we need to be honest and to recognize that we only know what we think we know about climate change because of the science of climate change. We only know what we think we know because of the science. And if we are going to make out that we, or a particular guru who we might follow, knows better than the climate scientists, then we better have a pretty good case to justify what makes us think that we know better. To which the riposte might be, well, such and such a group of scientists signed such and such a letter. A couple of years ago, I was asked to sign a letter from what appeared to be a reputable source about world peace. And I happily signed it. And then I almost didn't notice an email that came in a year later saying, by the way, we've tweaked the document that was being signed, and we've decided that we now have to bring 5G into this. And we have to point to the dangers of 5G as part of controlling people and so on. So we've built this into the document. My goodness, I could so easily have not noticed that email. I got back in touch with them and said, I'm sorry, but I do not go along with the idea that 5G triggers nanoparticles that have been put into our brains. And if you're going to change the document in that way, please remove my signature from it, which was duly done. The point I'm making is that so often with these petitions or these collective letters, we sign them sorry, my internet went unstable. We sign them on trust, and we don't always think all that deeply about what it is we might be signing or how it might be used. Therefore, when I am assessing science, I look at the mainstream reports of credible scientific bodies, like the Royal Society, like NASA or NOAA in America, and in particular, the reports of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And in the science that I have summarized, I hope in reasonably readable terms for lay people, in Riders in the Storm, I am drawing almost entirely on the three most recent reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. That is what I hold to be the gold standard. And to people who say, oh, well, you know, that's all been compromised, or that's all been exaggerated, I say, hang on. These are people, these reports are written by people with reputations worth not losing. That's what I trust. That's as best as I can get it. That's where my discernment, to use a Quaker word, brings me to. I now want to move in the final 15 minutes or so to what this calls for us as Quakers or as other people open to a deeper perspective, call it a faith perspective, spiritual perspective, whatever language would most speak to you in that regard. What does it call from us? And I'm going to lead you into this with a few more slides, because in understanding what it calls from us, what it calls for from us, I think we need to think deeper about what drives climate change. I speak in the books of what I call the twin drivers of population and consumption. Now, don't freak out when I mention that. I'm simply saying that the total of annual greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere are the population of the world multiplied by the average consumption in the world. That's undeniable. That's just the way it is. You can alter either of those factors. You can alter population, or you can alter level of consumption. And the reality, as you will be well aware, is that the consumption of wealthy people can be a factor of dozens and even hundreds of times greater than the consumption of poor people. In my lifetime, born in 1955, world population has grown approximately 3 times. World emissions caused by consumption, greenhouse gas emissions caused by consumption, have grown 6 times. In other words, consumption has been double the problem of population in my lifetime. What is it that brings population down in the world? What brings population down in the world is not population control, which has got the whole thing such a bad name. What brings it down in the world is women's emancipation, women's freedom combined with social justice. So people no longer have to worry so much about the future and have lots of kids as an insurance policy. And as many of you will know, in some countries of the world, population is falling very rapidly indeed. I mean, even countries like, Catholic countries, I mean, Portugal, the fertility rate is currently only 1.2, well below replacement rate. Ireland is about the same as Britain at round about 2.1, thereabouts. And even, some parts of India are now dipping beneath replacement level. A combination of women's emancipation and social justice. So that is what is happening in the background on the population front, but the worrying side is consumption. The worrying side is what drives us to consume more and more and more. I can't get no satisfaction because I try and I try and I try. Buying a stairway to heaven, that is the worrying side of things, because consumerism is an addiction. Now notice I've used 2 words there. I've used consumption and I've used consumerism. I define consumerism as consumption that is in excess of what is needed for a dignified sufficiency of living. In excess of what is needed for a dignified sufficiency of living. In other words, here is a place where our Quaker testimonies on simplicity, our Quaker practice on simplicity, really comes into play with important experience to bring to the table. Obviously, what is needed for a dignified level of sufficiency very
Tell him.
Sorry, I lost you for a moment there, folks. Maria, did I lose you for long?
No, just about 20 seconds.
Okay, it completely lost my connection and remade it, and then I was muted when I came in. Sorry, folks, it's just something, Govan is a hard-pressed part of Glasgow, and we're the last area to be in line for getting speeded up broadband. And that is just the way it is here, so that kind of things happen. So what I was saying is that we don't have to admire consumerism. It is, however, incumbent to see that everybody has enough, to see that everybody has sufficient consumption for their needs. So I want to press into this more deeply. I want to go back into screen sharing and back to my slides for a moment. And I'm going to take you to my home island of Lewis. And I'm just going to very quickly run you through something happening here that I talk about in more depth in the book here, but what you've got West Papua province in the Indonesian side of New Guinea. Internet unstable again. It usually goes for about 10, 15 seconds, then it comes back again. People from West Papua province in the Indonesian side of New Guinea. And what we've been doing here is we've been exchanging experience about community empowerment and about relationship to the land and that history. I can't say too much about the political background here because I will be insensitive to the situation. But I can say that these are people who are grassroots involved. Most of the people there, one or two government people there, but most of the people there are grassroots involved in the communities. And we're showing them around the community land trusts because land reform, as was mentioned in my introduction, is important in Scotland. We're going and we're sitting in village halls discussing how communities that had been disconnected from their land managed to get their land back in Scotland with the land reform we've got, and the difference it makes in terms of housing for the young, opportunities to set up business, community renewable energy, and so much else. And that's my friend Rusty, John MacDonald, the chair of the local historical society in our village on Lewis, Lower Bost. And we're heading over to that green area there. We're heading over, there's Loch Lower Bost, I grew up, and notice the ruins all around. Now we would come, you see that bay there, we would come and gather shellfish, gather the mussels and cockles there. And we would play as children, we would play in those ruins down by the sea there. And people would just say there were houses from the old days. And so I want to take you back then. I want you to notice certain things. This is on the high tide, and notice how the pine trees are growing right down where the salt water is. How come that is? That's because that pine is 5,000 years old. That is bog pine being washed out as rising sea levels. The sea levels worldwide rose about 6 inches during the 20th century. And as we've seen, they're going to rise more like 4 to 4 feet on most projections, between about 0.5 meter and 1 meter in the 20th century. So what you've got here is that the ground is being washed out by the sea, that seawater there, and bog pine that's about 5,000 years old being revealed underneath the peat. Here you see it again. There you see the lines, you see the raised bed agriculture, you see the lines of bygone agriculture, and you can see how the sea on the rising sea levels and the increased storminess is eating away at the land, nibbling away at it like this. So that's us gathering shellfish. And we had a big pot, we cooked up the mussels and had a feast on the beach. Fantastic way to make connections across cultures with using food like that. And then we sat in these ruins, and you see the fair-haired lassie there, Evelyn Cool MacLeod. She proceeded to tell us, this house belonged to one of my great, many times, whatever, grannies. And what happened there, as our friends from the village here proceeded to point out, is that the landlords in the 19th century evicted the people from there. And one of the families, to whom Rusty here is probably related, so it's not exactly clear, but he's certainly from the same area, one of the families was of the maternal line of Donald Trump. So in the 1820s, Donald Trump's ancestors were evicted from this land. Mackenzie Stewart, Colonel Francis Humberston Mackenzie Stewart, who was at that time governor of the slave colony of the Barbados. So from the Barbados to pay his gambling debts, he ordered the eviction of people, not just in this village here, but in so many villages in the south of Lewis. Now, if I can just flick back onto stopping screen share, but I've just given you a few images there. What we see going on very visibly there is you see climate change kicking in, but you also see an insight into the human face of it. That there you have people who are forcibly evicted, who emigrated to the Americas or to Australia or wherever they were pushed to. Many died, many went into the military and never came back. They emigrated far and wide. But what does that do to people? What I've just shown you happening in the 1820s on my home island of Lewis also happened in England with the enclosures, but it's not much taught about in schools. It's not much talked about. You ask English people, do you know about the enclosures? What happened? Do you know why the local landed estate has got so much land and ordinary people are paying high rents and can't get houses? And most English people don't know their own history. They don't know the radical history out of which the Quakers, Levellers, Diggers, Ranters, and so on came. Indeed, the Quakers are the only remnants today of those radical English 15th, 16th, 16th century, 17th century, 17th century traditions. That is something that we are carrying. That is part of our history. Gerard Winstanley, one of the greatest, well, the greatest leveller, Gerard Winstanley, was in all probability buried as a Quaker. Quakerism was just taking shape at that time in English history. So you've got clearance of people from the land. And I suggest to you that with it comes an inner collapse. With that comes a disconnection, a sense of rootlessness, a sense of having lost control and at a very deep level needing to take back control, but not knowing where to take it back from. And that internet unstable, that emptiness, so you've had clearance, you've had inner collapse, leads to a need to fill the emptiness. And in the absence of anything better, it makes us vulnerable to consumerism. It makes us vulnerable to consume. Because you can't have real relationship being held in the basket of a living community, like I've just shown you, I was privileged to be raised in on Lewis there. I was born, incidentally, of an English mother. I was born in Doncaster, and at the age of 4, my Scottish father got a job as a doctor in that area that I have just shown you, hence my hybrid background. And in that community, I was held in the basket of the community in a way that somebody like Donald Trump was not held. There's the book by Mary Trump, one of his relatives, and talking about, the young Donald growing up with parents who were too busy to care in a big house with servants. He was not held in that basket. His narcissism was not rubbed off in a big time way, a bit like the guy on the motorbike who set that land on fire in the south of France that I showed you earlier. Donald went out to set the world on fire. And this is what happens. This is what happens when, when you make a basket. Let me get my basket that a French bread maker gave me. When you make a basket, you've got the long bits here, which are the warp, the bits that go out at warp speed. And then the weft is the sideways bits you weave in. Same if you're weaving a fabric. And the problem when people are not held in community is it's all warp at warp speed and no weft. The bits and weaves that bind together are not there. And this is where, when you ask, what can I do? When you say, perhaps I'm elderly or I'm disabled in some way, what can I do about climate change beyond living simply in a way that I perhaps already do? I would put it to you, it's not rocket science, because we've had clearance, actually or metaphorically, in our past. We've had collapse in terms of psychological, real human connections, of what it means to be what Martin Luther King called the beloved community, a religious society of friends. We've had collapse. That has led us into consumption as consumerism. And what is the antidote? The antidote, I would put it to you, is community. And so building community is so crucial. But there is one other thing that I would add to that. In order to build community, we must build our inner strengths. We must build our inner strengths. And so I end Riders in the Storm with a chapter called The Rainmakers, in which I give several examples. But one of them is drawn from the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, whose close friend Richard Wilhelm, who produced the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching, was a missionary in China in the 1920s, or round about a bit earlier than that. He left in the 1920s, at the time of the First World War. And while he was there was a terrible drought. He told a story to Jung. It was one of Jung's favorite stories. Terrible drought. The grass started dying, the animals started dying, the people knew that they would be next. So what did they do? They called in, first of all, the Protestant missionaries, like Wilhelm himself. And they said their prayers and delivered their long sermons, and no rain. So they called in the Catholic missionaries, who processed around with rosary beads and holy water, and no rain. And then they called in the traditional Taoist and Confucian shamanic priests, who set off fireworks and guns to frighten away the evil spirits that had caused the drought, but no rain. And finally, as a last resort, they called in the Rainmaker. The Rainmaker was a wizened little old man. He arrived and they said, "What do you want?" He said, "I need nothing. Just give me a hut." For 3 days and 3 nights, he sat in the hut. He sat in the hut until such time as there was an unseasonable fall of snow that melted to yield rain. The Rainmaker headed off back to his own province, but before he left, Wilhelm caught up with him and said, "What did you do? Was it magic spells? Was it incantations?" "No, what did you do?" said Wilhelm. "I just," said Wilhelm, "did you just get lucky that you only had to wait?" My spirit was in, sorry, unstable there. My spirit was in the Tao. My spirit was in Aletheia, truth as reality. My spirit was in the Satya, truth as reality, as Satyagraha. But when I came here, my spirit was no longer in the Tao, and that was why I asked to go and sit in the hut. And when I found my spirit was back in the Tao, the drought was relieved. And so, friends, I put it to you, as Quakers, or of people who are sufficiently sympathetic to such ways of thinking as to have stayed with us this long, this afternoon. I put it to you that the deepest work we can do towards climate change is what we bring of our presence, of our spirit. I put it to you that in our 350 odd year old tradition, we have got ways like creative listening, meetings for clearness, understanding spiritual journeys, helping people to come spiritually alive. We have got things that we can bring to the table and are very much needed in these times. I put it to you that that is how we can help to be riders on the storm. We may not succeed in riding the storm out. We may be amongst those who already in the world are suffering from climate change. But our calling as people of faith is not to despair, not to give up hope, not to be over-optimistic, but not to give up hope, but to bring depth and grounding so that we can deepen our humanity like the rainmaker. And then may it rain and sunshine on the earth in right harmony. Thank you.